today is clean water. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to review the evolution of the federal involvement, engagement in water pollution, and to a degree, the state engagement. We're going to look for a few minutes at the movie that the Committee on Public Works prepared in 1963 on dirty water, just to have, so you can have an idea of what the industrial planet was looking like when all of this began. We talked about the Cuyahoga and the Mahoning River fires. Then after the movie, we'll go through the evolution of law, and at some point, either this morning or Wednesday morning, we'll get into the details of the 72 Act.
Yeah, one of the things that's different from the clean air context is there's a much longer history of social efforts to do something about water pollution that we now characterize as water pollution. You'll hear of, especially in more detailed histories, that it wasn't called water pollution, it was called sanitary engineering. That the focus on sanitation was has longer roots than the concern with breathing poor quality air. So we'll have a bit more history in this context than we did in the clean air context. So with that, if you could at least start the movie, that would be good. It's troubled waters there.
How long is the movie?
Oh, it's, I don't know, 20.
Maybe half an hour, we're only gonna show
We're gonna
4
just
or 5 minutes.
give you the flavor.
You notice it's called a report by the Committee on Public Works.
Why is that important?
Water. Most of all man's life, the way we know it, could not exist.
That's Henry Ford.
Man uses the waters of the earth to quench his thirst, to grow his food, and prepare it, to wash himself and his surroundings. Water. To make all the goods he uses every day: steel, oil, coal, cotton, wool, plastics, leather, glass, chemicals. And all of these activities change the water, alter, remove some of its natural purity and undesirable substances. Water is the great purifier of the earth. It has been the symbol of purification since ancient days. When men first observed its cleansing power, wash to dilute the wastes of man and beast and make them harmless. And water can purify itself too, if there's enough time and space between the jobs men ask it to do. Too often in America today, there's not enough space between cities, factories, and homes. Not enough time between the use of water by one person and its reuse by the next. Result, a nationwide water pollution problem.
Why can't we get any decent drinking water in this town anymore?
They shouldn't be allowed to dump all that crud in our trout stream.
All we want is a place to swim near home.
How can you expect me to stay in business here if I can't even use this water in my plant?
special subcommittee on water pollution will be in order. In the course of these hearings, the subcommittee will objectively examine and inquire into the whole breadth and scope of the water pollution problem facing the nation. It will also consider the specific items of legislation presently before us on this subject. A staff report dealing with the nationwide pollution problem reveals a rapidly increasing backlog of needs. While the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1956 and the 1961 amendments have provided the basis for a national program, much more is indicated as urgently necessary. We are glad to hand you here this morning.
That's not.
That's enough?
Man has only one source of water.
Okay.
Closed
You can,
circulation system.
Down for a minute, yeah. So one similarity to the clean air context is we're now experiencing in the period after the war the effects of massive urbanization and massive industrialization. And even in the words that were used in the film there, they're talking about concepts which were characteristic of the efforts to control water pollution, the use of the rivers actually to do the management or the treatment, and a perception that all water pollution was simply organic waste material, sewage, basically. And so at this same time, like we saw in the case of air pollution, we're beginning to change our understanding of what water pollution is, understand the chemical composition of it, and then attempting to, with new technology, monitor and analyze those effects. So we're in another one of those periods of tremendous transformation technologically and in our understanding of what was actually happening with the industrial world. So we'll see many dimensions of things make that transition culminating in the 72 Act, but continuing through to the present. That example in Toon, Tennessee, because if you remember the sampling questions that were raised there, that was 1978. So we're still somewhat in advance of 78 in this period of the late 60s. So
And in 1963, and until 1972, the basic measure of water pollution control was similar to capacity. How much capacity did a water body have to assimilate waste without exhausting its biological oxygen demand? Is that a proper way to phrase it?
that's it's looking at the waste stream as strictly materials that, when released into the environment, bacterial systems in the water would break it down and to basically inert material, and in that process those organisms used oxygen. So if there was too much waste in there, the bacteria would use up all the oxygen in the stream and cause an environmental problem, including fish kills, because the fish had no oxygen in the water to have respiration. So it was a perception, and there was one other thing that was perceived at that time, and that was pathogens are a function of human and other waste. And so there was concern over pathogens as well as this oxygen demanding or assimilative capacity capability of the natural water system. Very limited perception of what was pollution. And we're now beginning to see things change. Again, we talked about the effect that Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, had in 1962. which was, the whole thesis of that treatise was that there were these synthetic organic chemicals being released into the environment, and in that case, reaching surface waters. So right at the beginning, so you were developing public policy, sometimes in concert with, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead of the capacity of the technological scientific community to really understand what is happening out in the environment. So that becomes an important sort of interplay as public policy is developing. Knowledge feeding the public policy feeding the knowledge. And we'll now turn to some of the, if you could.
First is we're going to walk through an evolution of water pollution related legislation to establish a predicate for what happened in 1972. In 1899, Congress enacted a piece of legislation referred to as the Refuse Act. And for the purpose of our discussion, that act contained two key provisions. One provision was related to discharges of industrial matter into or on the banks of navigable waters, which might have the effect of impeding navigation. It was a statute directed to the Corps of Army Engineers authority to maintain the navigable waters of the United States, and its sole purpose, as far as we could determine, was to protect navigation, in part to facilitate waterborne transportation, and in part to reduce the cost to the federal government of dredging those waterways to maintain navigation. The second part of that legislation, Section 10 of the 1899 Act, provided for the regulation of the disposition of dredge and fill material. The Corps of Engineers had the responsibility to dredge these channels, and they had the responsibility to dispose of that dredged material. And that provision essentially was an authorization to regulate the disposition of dredge spoil so as to not interfere with navigation.
Let me, if I could, introduce here what, in addition to the evolution that I talked about before, we're also seeing an evolution here that will continue and continues to this day. One of the significant controversies before both Congress and the courts right now is the reach of federal jurisdiction over water. And that issue is very much faced here. And the constitutional basis for this statute is much more direct. The Constitution explicitly refers to navigation. And so the statutes that were enacted giving authority to the Corps of Engineers were based upon that authority. The authority to protect navigation. And these cases, both industrial outfalls and the dumping of dredge material, that was the concern of the Corps of Engineers. And we'll see as we go through this how that expanded. For instance, the legal question that we can now answer, but you couldn't answer then, is, well, if the Corps of Engineers made a judgment that this particular activity would be consistent with protecting navigation and then authorize it, could they evaluate any other effects, for instance, on fish and wildlife or on wetlands? Could they do that? And the answer at that time was no. The only sort of prism through which they could look at these issues was the effect on navigation. And it might surprise you about industrial outfalls. Industrial outfalls from steel making, from power plant production, would release massive amounts of material that would settle out of the natural system. Solids, and it would form barriers to navigation. So that is the, it wasn't concerned over, quote, industrial pollution, it was concerned over these materials obstructing navigation. And that act has been implemented in that manner up until the period that we'll turn to in the late 60s and early 70s. That was the way the Corps was implementing that program, just as automatic as you could have about judging whether there was